Thanks for being here. So today's class, what we're gonna do is we're gonna go through, and I said this on Tuesday, but just as a reminder, we have to do 4 hours of talking about, which by the way, when I say 4 hours, like, we really don't have to, because every hour is really only 50 minutes in when it comes to this. So when I say 4 hours, it's really like more like 3, I guess. So anyway, so we're gonna today go through and spend the first, so we have 2 different classes that are on the REPC. So I always have to say that over and over and over again, because inevitably somebody's gonna say next week, or I think it's next week, next Thursday, they'll miss and be like, oh, well, I had already done the REPC. There's two REPC classes they have to do as part of this. Okay. So today we're going to go through, and what those 2 classes are going to look like is, today's what we're going to do is we're going to go through and just talk about like the contract part of it. Next Thursday is how do you fill it out? So if you have questions today, please ask. But most of what we're going to do today is just talking about the contract and helping you understand it. So I'm going to get my screen share done here so that you can see the purchase contract on the screen here. And then for you guys that are here in the room with me, do you want the lights on or off? Probably off, right?
Probably off, yeah. And I think it looks better for the internet too when they are not on.
It's better for them if it's off?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so, and as actually one thing real quick here. So Lindsay, make sure you throw in the chat box your first and last name so that I have that as the record for being here. And then actually, Lindsay, if you notice somebody else jump on, will you either remind me, either unmute and let me know, or just maybe throw in the chat box something for them to, I'm gonna let you help me keep track. I think there was one other person, that Zoe, that was on Zoom last time. Yesterday, she sent me a message and said, I got on at 11 o'clock and nobody was on. So I waited 10 minutes and then hung up. And I said, well, that's because the class was Thursday, not Wednesday. So anyway, so I don't know if she'll be back on today. Maybe we offended her.
Yeah, but yesterday that was the social media.
Maybe that's what she was thinking, is, but she must have used this link, or, oh yeah, maybe that was, I don't know. Anyway.
Yeah, because they have social media. Yes, it was here, but I think they sent a link too.
Oh, you're right, they did. So I'll bet that is what she was meaning, is she probably got on for that one, but I don't know. Anyway, either way, so hopefully she'll, in fact, actually, let me do this. Drag this and put it up here to where, okay, now it'll be good. I'll notice. Okay. So here's what we're going to do. So again, the idea of today is we want to go through and talk about the real estate purchase contract. And I want to kind of go through as many of the sections as we can get through in our time that we have together. Please ask questions if you have them. The idea behind what I'm trying to accomplish with this is like I said on Tuesday, it's twofold. One part of this is the division just requires it, so we're doing it for that. But more important to me is the thing that holds most agents back, especially new agents, from getting started, is the fear of filling this out. And so I want to try to alleviate that fear from you if you have it. If you don't, then no big deal. But I also want to make sure you understand the contract and that you understand what it says and how it works and all those kinds of things, just because what we want to do is make sure that you don't end up getting sued. And that's kind of the big deal, right?
Begin with, you have seen agents getting in trouble, getting sued because of not filling this properly.
Yeah, or making mistakes on not filling out the contract properly to where it ends up costing their client, money or whatever, and then usually ends up means it costs you money. And so, and also a question that actually just came up a few minutes ago that when we get to section 2, I'll point out and we'll talk about too. So again, the idea of today is we're not going to really spend a whole lot of time. Like, how do you fill it out? If you have questions, go ahead and ask, but next Thursday is going to be all about how to fill it out. Okay. All right. So the first thing that I always want to point out is this. This is a legally binding
Yeah.
contract.
There's nothing in next week is.
Yeah. Well, and next week, actually, we'll give you, next week's class will have a handout of it. We'll give you two, but anyway. Okay, so the first thing is just this is a legally binding real estate purchase contract. It's important for you to understand that, but more so for your clients to understand this is a legally binding contract. And unfortunately, the world that we live in today is there are too many times where somebody will enter into a contract and then down the road, they're like, well, I don't want to do that anymore or whatever. And they think they should just be able to get out of it just by them saying, I don't want to do it. And not related to the real estate purchase contract, but we've got one right now that we're sending a demand letter to a client of ours saying you went and bought a house without us and now you owe us a commission. And again, people try to just think of it as, well, I signed it, but it just didn't work out. Sorry, or whatever. It doesn't work that way. Okay. So this is a legally binding form. Okay. Now, the next piece of this, so the next section down is earnest money. Okay. And on this, well, let me just ask the question to you guys first. So we've got in here, it says that after acceptance, that an earnest money deposit in the amount of, whatever the amount of, in the form of however much, after acceptance will be deposited. And where does it get deposited?
With brokerage.
Okay, good. Well, that's the right answer. What Lisa said right there is the right answer. Is notice right here that it says into the brokerage real estate trust account. Okay, so once we have the earnest money, and we're going to spend some time talking about this too, but once we have the earnest money, it's going to get deposited into the brokerage real estate trust account. So when we say the brokerage real estate trust account, whose brokerage real estate trust account? Okay, the principal broker.
You buy it, right?
So is it into the buyers or the sellers?
The seller.
Okay, so I have
Yeah,
one buyer and one seller.
Seller.
So two sellers now. Okay, Jessica, what do you think? Lindsay,
the
what do you
buyers,
think?
I said the buyer.
Into the buyers,
Yeah,
okay?
buyers.
Lindsay, thoughts?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we got
I'm
you.
sorry, can you repeat the question?
Okay, once we get earnest money, whose brokerage trust account does it go into? The buyer or the seller's brokerage?
The buyers by default.
Okay, so we have two people saying buyer and two people saying seller. So the answer is the brokerage real estate trust account. So really, it could be either. At the-
Good faith, it's a good faith deposit.
It is a good faith deposit.
So what good does it do in the buyers? It's their money.
Right. So here's the thing. So the way that our real estate purchase contract used to read, the one that we had before this one, it said into the buyer's brokerage real estate trust account. But for whatever reason, and I don't know why, but the state of Utah, when they updated this form, they changed it to just say the brokerage real estate trust account. Now, I have an idea of why I think maybe they did, but my thinking is the reason they did that is because there are some real estate brokerages that I almost said that don't have a trust account, but that actually is not true. You have to have a trust account to be a brokerage, but that there are some real estate brokerages that will not put money in their trust account. And the reason behind that is there's just too many opportunities for issues to arise from that. And so a lot of companies have decided they're just not going to do it. And so then what happens is the earnest money gets, or was, and still does today, but gets deposited into the title company's account. So it's gonna be with the title company. Now, in the event that's going to happen, that you're gonna put it into the title company, what would you need to do?
Make an addendum for that.
Okay, good. And the addendum should say what? Or what specific addendum?
There's one specifically, it's called like deposit into the title company.
Good, that's exactly right. So if the money is going to be deposited into either of the brokerage's trust accounts, we don't need to do an addendum. If it's going to go to a title company, we need the addendum that is earnest money deposit into the title company. I can't remember the exact name of it, but we need that addendum because that's going to then override what this says. But it can be deposited into either the buyer's brokerage trust account or the seller's brokerage trust account. And so I think they worded it this way so that in the event that the buyer's brokerage does not use their trust account, that because of how this is worded, it could go into the seller's brokerage's trust account. So it doesn't matter. So here's part of what I guess I'm saying is there are disadvantages to the earnest money being deposited into a title company. Any idea what those disadvantages are?
Fees?
No, there's no fees to it.
Oh,
All right, here's what it is. I'll tell you. So the disadvantage to earnest money being deposited at the title company is there are certain sections, and I'll point out some of them as we go through the contract today. There are certain sections of our real estate purchase contract that say in the event, the buyer were to cancel based on this section, they automatically get the earnest money back. Well, the problem with the earnest money being at a title company is the title company, even though the contract may say the earnest money, if the buyer cancels, say on due diligence, they get the earnest money back. Even though the contract says that, the title company is going to say, we want both the buyer and the seller to sign before we release the earnest money. So what would happen then if the seller won't sign?
They won't release the funds then.
That's right. If the seller wouldn't sign, the title company says, then we can't release the earnest
yeah. The more fishermen you get in the pond, the muddier the water
money.
gets.
I like it. Yes, exactly right. So that's where for me, here's what I'm recommending is in the event you have a listing and the buyer's agent shows up saying, we want to deposit earnest money with the title company. My recommendation would be to counter that and say, we'll keep it in our brokerage's trust account. Because then we aren't going to need both signatures to get that earnest money released.
So that will mean that usually the earnest money will go to the buyers.
Yeah, typically it does go to the buyer's brokerage.
Buyer's brokerage. And like you said, if they want to do the title, then suggest that.
Yeah. Yep, or probably the better answer is than that is just make sure your client understands if it's going into the title company that in the event that there was some reason to have it released to your client and the other side won't sign the agreement to release it, it could become a fight to get it back. Think so?
So it's their funds to begin with. It's just kind of keeps it simple.
Correct. Yep. All right. So now the next thing on this, the next question for you. So you are representing a buyer. You get the contract you get the contract accepted. Explain to me how the earnest money is going to work as far as how long till we get it, how long until it has to be deposited. Which, by the way, in real estate school, they taught you that any money you receive has to be deposited within how many days? 3 days. Okay, so now tell me what we have to do in terms of getting the earnest money and depositing it.
So to deposit it within 3 days somewhere.
Okay, so Ross, who receives the earnest money deposit?
Well, that's what I'm asking you guys. Yeah. So who receives the earnest money and when?
The agent receives it,
Okay, the agent's got to get it.
they have to deposit it in the trust account in 3 days.
4 calendar days.
Okay,
Just reading that.
good. That's what you should do. Good. Okay, so let's make sure that we understand. Okay, so what this says here is that no later, so let's start, let me just highlight it so everybody knows where we're at here. So an earnest money, actually, let's back up to that. Buyer offers to purchase from the seller the property described below and agrees to deliver no later than 4 calendar days after acceptance and earnest money deposit in the amount of after acceptance of the REPC by the buyer and the seller and the receipt of earnest money. The brokerage shall have 4 calendar days in which to deposit the earnest money. So based on that, how long do we have to get the earnest money and get it deposited?
Says what?
It says 4 days, I thought it was
Calendar days.
Okay.
calendar days. Calendar days, yeah.
Okay, so you're half right.
6 days, isn't it 6?
Okay, so now we've gone from 4 to 6.
I swear I read somewhere it was 6 though.
Okay,
I don't
so
remember.
let me walk you through it, okay? Let's start up here. They agree to deliver no later than 4 calendar days after acceptance and earnest money deposit in the amount of, in the form of. Okay? After acceptance of the REPC by the buyer and the seller, and, keyword and, receipt of the earnest money by the brokerage,
Okay,
the brokerage shall have 4 calendar days in which to deposit the earnest money into the brokerage real estate trust
Oh,
account.
okay. Just
So
finish
the
reading it.
key word though is, you said it's 8, you're missing one word. It's
Calendar.
up to,
Oh,
I guess maybe 2 words, up to 8 days. Now, why would it be up to 8 days? Why am I really reinforcing the up to?
Cause it can take any time up to 8 days.
Okay, but why? You're right, why? Why could it take up to 8 days?
It depends on like when you get it, right?
Good, that's exactly right.
Yeah, because if it's before, depending again when you got it, if it's a Friday, then there is a span in there of the weekend until you can do really the transaction on Monday.
Okay, that's fine. Which, by the way, that is the reason that the contract says the brokerage shall have 4 calendar days to get it deposited, is because if we got the earnest money and it was a Monday holiday, so you had over the weekend, it could put us out of the contract. So the reason, even though the state law says 3 days after you receive any money, you have to deposit it, why is it okay to be 4 now? So the state law is 3 days. Why is 4 okay?
Because of what you just said. Because of the weekend,
That's-
the Monday could
But
be.
that's not why.
Okay, now what?
I mean, that's good, yes, but that's not why. So why is 4 days okay
Who knows?
when the law says 3 days? So you're
'Cause isn't it
thinking
calendar days versus like that. There's
business
a
days.
difference, yeah, right?
Well, so there is a difference, but the reason that you can do it in 4 calendar days versus 3 on what the law says is just because buyer and seller are agreeing to 4. So you could do an addendum and say the brokerage shall have up until 10 days to, or not up till, it shall have 10 days after receipt of the earnest money to deposit. And then we could wait 10 days. So the reason it's 4 is okay is because buyer and seller have agreed to that. If for some reason they had not agreed to it, meaning, sorry, if there wasn't something in writing saying that it's 4 days, then it would be 3. So hopefully I'm not confusing you. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
I mean, but right now, it's using this, it's stated in there, so it's 4, right? Right?
So what, I'm not sure. What
Because
you
it's in writing, this 4,
yes,
because you said if it's not in writing, it will be,
correct. So
But right now
because
it's-
this says 4,
Yeah.
we're okay. Now, why though do we have then up to 8 days? And the reason, again, I want to make sure you guys are understanding this. We don't have 8 days, we have up to 8 days.
Where does
So-
it say that?
Well, it doesn't really say it, but it says it in here. So it says it actually
We
in,
come across that, yeah.
well, it says, it doesn't straight out say it, but it says it right there. Oops, let me.
After acceptance.
So here, let me walk you through it. As soon as I tell you this, you'll go, okay, I get it. I think. So the buyer is agreeing to deliver no later, so keywords there, no later than 4 calendar days after acceptance. So if it says no later than 4 calendar days, what does that mean?
No later.
Means they could do it sooner.
Yeah, it can
Right.
do 1, 2, whatever.
Yeah, it could be 1 or 2.
Whatever
Good.
they can do.
So let's say that they do it in 2 days. The buyer gives it to you within 2 days after acceptance. So if that was the case, the buyer gives me the earnest money within 2 days. Now, how many total days would I have to get it accepted? I mean, excuse me, deposited.
2. Right, because he already used 2.
Good. No, Lisa's right. What did you say?
6. This is first grade math.
Well, thank you, Lisa.
Yeah, I know, right? Okay, so
I can do it.
yeah, that is a good way of saying it. I'm gonna start teaching it that way. We're gonna do a story problem today in class. So, yeah, so they have up to, so think of it this way. When we say 8 days, we have 4 days and 4 days.
Yeah.
So you have 4 days to receive it, but if you get it in 2, we have 4 days to then get it deposited. So how many days would we have in that
6.
case? Okay, what if? Now I'm just gonna laugh. I'm like, I feel like I'm a first grade teacher now. If we have 4 days to receive it and 4 days to deposit it, and we receive it in 1 day, how many days do we have to deposit it?
4,
So for a total of,
5,
does that make sense?
yes.
So,
It doesn't change on that end, no matter when you get it.
good, yes.
Okay.
So no matter, that's a good way of saying it, Jessica. No matter when you get it, the brokerage has 4 calendar days to get it deposited. So you have 4 days to receive it, 4 days to deposit it. And the reason I'm spending so much time on this and to some extent being so elementary on it is because this section is very misunderstood in our real estate, because most agents will say what Jessica said in the beginning is you have 8 days. Well, that's not really true. You have potentially 8 days, but it depends on how many days after acceptance it takes for them to give you the earnest money.
Then after that point,
Then you have 4 days.
So I don't know if you have seen instances where the buyer takes long.
Good, yes, that was the next thing I want to talk about. So and here's the thing, we're probably going to spend more time on this section than we do anything else we're talking about today, because this tends to be the one most misunderstood and
where people screw up.
yeah, that's a better way to say it, where people tend to screw up. So Lou's brought up a good point. What happens if it takes somebody longer than 4 calendar days to get you the earnest money?
That will be a breach of.
Good, that's right. That would be a breach of the contract. So the buyer would now be in default on the contract. So what do we do in that scenario? Do they just lose the earnest money and it's over?
Well, they can lose it if they haven't even given it.
So that's a good point. Liz is saying, how did they lose it if they haven't even given it to you yet?
Yeah.
Okay, so what do we do to fix the problem?
You keep negotiating. Everything's still on the table.
Okay, but good. So when you say keep negotiating, what does that mean?
Keep talking to both parties. You keep negotiating and you have to rewrite the contract.
Hey, close. You don't have to rewrite the contract.
But you do an addendum.
You have to do an addendum.
Extending the.
So do an addendum and extend that earnest money will be received or to be received by such and such date.
You can
And
do that with an addendum.
correct, you could just do an addendum.
Because that will fall into the category that you said is whatever the the buyer and the seller agree together.
Correct,
If they
that's
say-
right.
If they say
Good.
10, if they say less.
Yep.
Oh,
Yeah, whatever the buyer and seller agree is great. So in the event you notice that your client is not going to be able to get you the earnest money within the time frame, do an addendum extending that time frame. So extend that the buyer shall have until such and such date to deliver the earnest money to the brokerage.
And hopefully the seller is going to agree to that. Right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
Hopefully it's going to
correct.
agree to the other.
if they don't, then now the buyer would be in default on the contract, and then we'll talk about what the remedies are to that in a minute.
So the safe way will really explain to the client, hey, we have this window, please let's keep it, because if not, we are asking for different other circumstances that we don't want.
Correct.
So let's keep this alive.
Correct. And keep in mind, again, this, I know I keep saying it over and over again, but it's because of the number of times we end up dealing with it. You have 4 days to get it from them, not 8. Once we get it, we have 4 days to deposit it, but we have to receive it from them. And when I say we have to receive it from them, meaning the brokerage. You are a representative of the brokerage, so you can receive it, but it is also okay if we have people show up here all the time and deliver it to, to Brianna.
Themselves
You
here.
can't tell people that. If you say you have 4 days, they'll take 5.
Correct. So tell them, yeah, so
They're like tenants. They're like
Yes.
children.
good. One of the things that I always do with the clients when we're filling this out, when I get to this section right here, where it says in the form of, oops. Why is it? I don't know why is this highlighting? Anyway, right here, in the form of, and you got this blank line. I always just ask them how they're gonna get me the earnest money, like how are they gonna pay it? And if it's a check, then I say, great, when can you get the check to me? Whatever it is, however they're gonna get me the money, when are you gonna get it to me? Now, the other thing too, to just keep in mind is we will not take cash. I had one time that this was a different office, but I was walking through the office and I saw an agent standing at the copier and they were making photocopies of $100 bills. And I was like, what are you doing? And they said, oh, my client gave me cash for the earnest money. And they were standing there photocopying the money. And I was like, you realize like that's against the law. What you're Yeah, so anyway, I just say that as kind of a joke. That has nothing to do with why we don't take it, but what we want them to, if they have only cash, have them go down to 7-Eleven and get a money order or something. So we don't want to take cash, have them go get a money order, go to their bank, get an official check, which really, that's the other thing to keep in mind on this is in the event that the client cancels the contract, and they did not give us an official check, if they gave us a personal check, we'll take a personal check, but we're not going to release the earnest money back to them until it has been deposited for over 10 days, or they have to bring proof that it cleared their account. If we have that, then we can release it, but typically we're not going to release it for 10 days because for a while there was a scam going on where what people would do is they would go to a real estate company, they would give them a bogus check or a stolen check, and then they would the next day say, I want to cancel that contract, just cut me a new check and give me the money back. And so once real estate companies figured out that was going on, all real estate companies now are like, we're not releasing the earnest money for 10 days till we know that has cleared. So,
That they were really funds to cover
Yep.
whatever they gave.
yeah. All right, good. So any questions on the earnest money section?
Oh, just a comment.
Okay.
Was the person client doing the copy, were they Hispanic? Because
No,
I just wonder who could have cash, because if you have,
right,
you will go to your bank and say, I need a cashier's check.
yeah. I
Unless you had it.
to be
on-
honest, I don't know if it was. Yeah, no, I don't know if it was or not, but
You know, because I'm thinking other than that, you can always get a cashier's check in your own bank before you give
Right.
it to the person.
right, yeah. But and that's what we want, is we would want them to go to the bank, get a cashier's check, bring it, and for 2 reasons. One is then we have actual money, real, it's like we don't have to wait for it to clear their account. So if they were to cancel 2 or 4 or 5 days later, we could just give them the money back. Make sense?
It's a paper trail.
Yeah, exactly. All right, we good on earnest money?
So wait. You
Okay.
just have 3-4 days, give the money back. What happened to the 10?
Well, if they bring us an official check, a
Uh-huh.
cashier's check from the bank,
Then that's as good as.
that's as good as cash. So. All right, next. Is the offer to purchase. So this section here. There's a couple things that I want to point out is just and again, we're not talking about how to fill it out, so we'll do that up next Thursday on what to put in the lines and stuff. But down in section 1.1 lists the included items. And just kind of the main thing I want to point out is you'll notice in section 1.1 that it talks about solar panels right here. That unless excluded herein, the sale will include all of these items. So in the event though that there are solar panels, what do we want to make sure to include with this contract? And if you don't know, that's okay. I'll tell you, but.
The contract where they got into buying the solar panels.
So what we want to know before that actually is there is a solar panel addendum. And so we want to make sure that
Solar panels.
there's one just for solar panels, and it is a place for the seller to disclose to the buyer if they're owned or leased.
At least.
Yeah. Or if they're making payments on it. So that way the buyer can know. So just kind of keep in mind, section 1.1 is talking about everything that's included. And if it includes, if the property has solar panels, make sure you use that solar panel addendum.
Do we find that in the W?
It's in dot loop or on the MLS as well.
Okay, so I find it.
You'd never know
You never know what.
if they didn't tell you.
Right. And too many times, that's why they created this addendum, is because there's too many times that then at closing, the buyer's told, oh, the seller's told you gotta pay off the lien that's on the property for the solar panels, and they don't have the money or whatever. So it's a way to deal with it up front, so there's no surprises. Okay. All right. Any other questions on that section? Let me just point out actually though, and I haven't heard of this happening for a long time, but notice that it does say light fixtures and bulbs. So like your client, the seller doesn't get to take the light bulbs. Okay, so they're included as part of the contract. The other thing actually that might be worth pointing out too is all installed TV mounting brackets. So the TV isn't necessarily included. And the reason I say isn't necessarily included is remember from real estate school, anything that is attached to the property is considered part of it. Well, so the reason this says all installed TV mounting brackets is because the brackets are usually mounted, but the way most TVs work now is the TV is sitting like the bracket slides into so the TV is not really mounted, it's just slid in. So the way that this is all installed TV mounting brackets. So if your client has one mounted, they don't get to just take the brackets. They can take the TV, they can't take the brackets. Okay. Also,
Have you seen instances where they take that and the agent has to replace it or something?
yeah, for sure. The other thing to keep in mind on it is like for example, we have this sound system right here, which is connected to the speakers, the 4 speakers that are here. So according to this section, the all wall and ceiling mounted speakers are included,
So
but
we
this
say-
would not be.
Because it's not attached, you can be.
That's right.
Right,
This
but
is
these
not-
are mounted.
Those are mounted in, so they're included. This would not be. But again, you want to make sure your buyers understand that, because sometimes they just would assume that's going to be included, but the speakers are included, but not the system.
that will be like for a home theater maybe,
Exactly.
because they have the speakers somewhere, I suppose, but there is a system that they can take.
That's correct. And that's why it says all wall and ceiling mounted speakers. So if they have like one that's not on attached to the wall or the ceiling, it's just, like the base for those theater systems is usually just plugged into the wall. They could take that. Okay.
All right.
Next piece to point out is section 1.2, other included items. Note, the only thing I want to say on this is just pay attention that it says washers, dryers, refrigerators, microwave ovens. Notice it's plural. All of those are plural. So if there is more than one washer or dryer, it's included. If you check the box, that makes sense. So any refrigerators, if they have one upstairs, one downstairs, one in the garage, by checking the box, refrigerators, they're all included.
Or they can specify in there, I'm leaving the main one, but the garage one is mine or something.
That's right, yeah, so that's the point, is if for some reason the seller's wanting to take the one in the kitchen, but they'll leave the one in the garage, specify it on an addendum or on this line right here.
But they could, really, Ross, they could take the refrigerator, right?
Yep.
Or
Well,
they
no,
could-
well, if you check the box, they can't.
I know, but if I don't check it.
If you don't check the box, they should take the refrigerator.
Now the washer, no washer, what is it? Oh, it's not. Like the dishwasher, that is not even there because it's attached, so it's staying, right?
The dishwasher, yeah, it is attached, so let's see, yeah, that dishwasher was listed up here somewhere. Dishwasher.
Okay,
All right, section 1.3 is where you'd list any excluded items. 1.4, the thing that I want to point out on section 1.4 on water service is that the purchase price for the property shall include all water rights, water shares, if any, and then here's the key piece, that are a legal source of seller's current culinary water service and irrigation service. So if they have a legal source for water shares or water rights, they are automatically included unless excluded on that line right there. Okay.
my last client, he had water shares. And he said he wanted to leave so many and take so many.
Okay.
He didn't want to leave all of them.
Yep. So then what you would want to do is on this line right here is you would want to specify that because it says the following water rights or water shares, if applicable, are specifically excluded from the sale. And then he could say 4 water shares or whatever, however many he was keeping. Yep. All right, next, this purchase price section. So Jason will spend more time on this. He's going to teach next Thursday, the REPC. He'll go through more on this. The only things I want to point out in section 2.1, the main thing I want to point out to you guys is any amounts listed in 2.1C and 2.1E may be adjusted as deemed necessary by the buyer and the lender. Okay, so when you fill this out, fill it out as to the best of your knowledge, but just recognize you don't have to do an addendum. If you're going to change the amount of a down payment they're going to do, you don't have to go through and adjust, do an addendum saying, hey, 2.1C and E are going to be different. So C is new loan, E is the down payment, their purchase, the cash of purchase, right? So anything you're going to change in C or E, you don't need to do an addendum. If you're changing any of the others, A, B, or D, you would need to do an addendum.
So just those two that are showing right there.
Yep, just 2.1C or E may be adjusted as deemed necessary by the buyer and the lender. So you don't have to get an addendum to change how much of a down payment they're going to do or anything that way. But if you're changing any of the others, A, B, or D, you would. Make sense? All right, next. The 2.2. This section here is the sale of the buyer's property. Now, let me explain why this section exists. The reason this section exists is our old contract before this one didn't have a section 2.2. And so what people would do is they would make an offer on a house. And they may have had a home they needed to sell, but they would make an offer on a home and not disclose that they had to sell this other house. And then they would come back later on and cancel based on finance and appraisal. And it really was because they didn't get their house sold. So as a result, to help clarify that and help agents be more forthright, we've now added this section. So it says the buyer's ability to purchase the property, and then it has, comma, to obtain the loan referenced in 2.1C above, and or any portion of the cash referenced in 2.1E is or is not conditioned upon the sale of real estate owned by the buyer. So the buyer has to disclose to the seller if part of the money that they're getting for this purchase that's going to be, referenced in 2.1C or E, if it is or is not conditioned upon them selling a house. They have to disclose that. So it either is or is not. Now, in the event they say that it is, so it says, if checked in the affirmative, the terms of the attached subject to the sale of the buyer's property addendum apply. What does that mean?
Yeah, what is that?
So let's read it again. If checked in the affirmative, so it's saying if you check is condition, the terms of the attached subject to the sale of the buyer's property addendum apply. So what is that? What would that mean?
There's an addendum somewhere?
That's right.
There's-
What it means is there is, by checking the box is, you are now saying we're attaching a subject to the sale of the buyer's property addendum. Which means if you check is, you need that. Now, here's why this is important. Right before I came into class, we have an agent here who, at our company, that has a listing. That they've got this home for sale, a buyer came in, brought them the REPC, they checked the box for is, and then they did a blank addendum. They didn't use the subject to the sale of buyer's property addendum. So there is an actual addendum called subject to the sale of the buyer's property addendum. The agent did not use that. Now, this wasn't our agent. This was from another company. Instead, they did a blank addendum and just said, buyer will have their property under contract by May 1st. Okay, so by doing that, has created a scenario now that, today is April 27th, so May 1st is coming up Monday. What they have done by doing this, by the way that agent did it, they didn't use the sale of the buyer's property addendum. So number one, the contract is already in a scenario of, it says there will be a subject to sale buyer's property addendum, and there's not one. So instead, it just says they'll get their property sold by May 1st. Well, so what happens if they don't?
They are in breach of contract.
That's right. They're now going to be in default.
Now,
They were thinking it would get them out of the contract, but actually it just puts them in breach.
Well, and here's the other problem. By just saying buyers will have their property sold by whatever date, doesn't say who gets the earnest money if they were to cancel based on that, which they really don't have the ability to cancel on it. It just says we'll get it sold by this date.
Who did that?
Well, that's the problem. It's not somebody who came through this training, right?
so I have a question because
Yes.
personally, I know of somebody in this company that has caused a lot of heartache right there.
Yeah,
And I think they marked the is condition,
okay.
but I don't know if they did any kind of addendum. Because to the best of my knowledge, they did not have an end date or saying
Yeah,
they didn't, so
Right.
this person was,
yep. I think I know which one you're talking about.
yes.
Because I was,
and-
yeah,
you know who,
Yes.
and is a she,
yes.
and I just talked to her not long ago, and she says you have no idea how much this has hurt me.
Yeah, it did.
Because she
You
says,
lost us all.
Okay, so let me explain. Okay, so we had a scenario within our company that an agent within our company made an offer on another property that was listed by an agent in our company that happened to be their own personal home, right?
yes, yes.
And they checked this box, but they didn't put an end date for how soon the buyer had to sell their house. So that put the seller in a position now of it could take the buyer 2 years and the seller would just have to wait. And it created big problems for this agent, but
So is the earnest money going to expire?
no,
So Ross,
luckily the buyer got their house sold and they were able to get it taken care of.
luckily, but it has still been not good for this person.
Oh, yeah, yep.
Still to now, to today.
Correct, which, so here's the moral of the story for that, of what Luz is talking about is exactly right, is what happened was the agent actually tried to go about not paying a commission to the company. And by doing that, created more problems for herself. If she would have actually just done it and included the company from the get-go, we would have been able to help her, but unfortunately, she went out and did a bunch of stuff on her own and then came and was like, help me. And my answer to that when they come and say, okay, help me, is remember what I told you at the start of the class. This is a legally binding purchase contract. So once it's agreed to by the buyer and the seller, there's not a whole lot we can do to change it and we did try to do an addendum asking the buyer, and here's the other problem. Because both agents are with our company, what does that mean for me?
You have to be neutral.
I
You
have to
can't-
be neutral. I
you
can't take.
cannot-
Stay out of it.
So it's not like I can go, okay, well, here's what we'll do. Like I had to be neutral and say, okay, well, I just had to basically say, here's what you can try to do. And then when the other agent came to me and said, what do we do? I said, well, you're got to decide what you want to do, but you don't have to sign it. Like I have to play in the middle. you know?
So I'm getting that there was no
Subject to the sale
there
of
was
buyer,
not an addendum there.
So I think there might have been, they just didn't actually put a date. I can't remember for sure, but
The big issue was there was no ending date.
Yeah,
That was the
there,
big issue.
the biggest problem was so the agent put the home on the market to look for a backup offer, got one. But then couldn't accept it because you couldn't you had to do it as a backup and that was it. She couldn't knock the first out of the way. So, yeah,
And then I just talked to her recently, like last week, and
Yeah.
she says, I'm still having problems with this. And I said to her, how so?
yeah.
She says, my husband is so unhappy that we could have sold it for higher,
Yeah,
but we didn't because of that. And he always takes that against me.
yeah.
And I said to him, "Ugh, you see what working with family is?" And she said, yeah.
Well, but I think the bigger thing though, to me, the more of the moral of the story for me was they were trying to avoid paying a commission. And had she had us involved from the get-go and coming, and that's the biggest thing I would say for you guys is if you get in a scenario where you're like, I'm not sure what to do and am I doing this right? Come and talk to us.
Yeah.
Because had she done that, we could have helped but unfortunately, once she got me involved, it was already like there was only so much we could do.
So I don't understand when you say she didn't want to pay a commission.
She didn't list the property. She did it as a for sale by owner initially.
Really?
That's what created the problem.
I thought she was doing a contract like this contract.
Well, she did do this contract, but she didn't do the exclusive right to sell. Instead, she did it as a for sale by owner, which means that the company was not part of the transaction.
Oh, I thought that she did it through the
So,
company.
yeah, no, at first she didn't. And so when she came to me for help, I said, I can't help you. We're not part of the transaction. So at first, I wasn't a limited agent. I was like, I'm on our agent's side. Even though you are an agent with our brokerage
But you
and you
weren't-
were selling the home for sale by owner, I can't help you. Does that make sense?
There was always an expiration date.
There wasn't on that one, no. Well, for them to get their home sold, there was not an expiration.
So that part I missed.
Yeah.
that
Oh,
she
yeah, of
wasn't
course.
Doing through the company,
At first, she ended up getting it through the company, but at first she,
but then it was too late.
it was too late for us.
to do that.
Yeah, I can't help when I'm not part of, like initially, I had to take the side of the buyer because that's the only person we represented.
Oh, heavens.
Yep.
Gee, that was different, right?
Oh, well, of course it is. All right, next section is settlement and closing. So this part is important to make sure you understand in terms of what is the difference. So you guys tell me, what is the difference between settlement and closing?
Settlement is just where you sign, right?
Good. Settlements when you're going to go to the title company, but it's a little more than that. Because settlement is when we're going to go to the title company and sign. Well, so let's just, so settlement shall occur only when all of the following have been completed. Buyer and seller have signed and delivered to each other or the escrow closing office all documents required by the REPC. So the first thing that has to happen for settlement to take place is buyer and seller signed all the documents and delivered them to either each other or the title company that are required by the REPC, by the lender, by the title insurance or escrow offices, or by written escrow instruction, including any split closing instruction if applicable, or by applicable by law. So that's first thing. Signed, give the documents to the right people. Second thing is any monies required to be paid by the buyer or seller in these documents have been delivered by the buyer or the seller to the other party or the escrow closing office in the form of cash, wire transfer, cashier's check, or other form acceptable to the escrow closing office. So settlement is signed and money delivered. Okay. So what is closing? For the purpose of the REPC, closing means that the settlement's been completed. So those two items. The proceeds of any new loan have been delivered by the lender to the seller or the escrow closing office, and C, the applicable closing documents have been recorded in the office of the county recorder, and the actions described in this, make sure you understand this piece. The actions described in 3.2 B and C, so the proceeds of the new loan and the recording, shall be completed no later than 4 calendar days after settlement. So once we go do settlement, we have how many days to get it?
Or
Yeah.
recording.
4 for the recording, for the new loan to come in and record it. Okay. Now that becomes important because of section 3.3 is possession. As provided in section 6.1 A and B, seller shall deliver physical possession to the buyer in so many, either upon recording, so many hours after, or so many days after recording. Okay.
So which one is the safest way to put it in there?
So it kind of varies for me. If the property is vacant, I always check upon recording. If, yeah, if its property is vacant. Otherwise, I usually do 24 hours or 1 day. Now, what's the difference? So yeah, let's talk about that actually. This is good. What is the difference between, let's say, 24 hours or 1 day?
And that's
It's close, but it's not the same. Now, the reason being is if it is 24 hours after recording, if it recorded at, what time is it? 11:55. Let's say it's records right now, 11:55. When would be possession?
Oh, yeah, tomorrow.
11:55
Next day.
tomorrow, right?
Yeah,
If we check 1 day after recording, when do they have to deliver it?
5 o'clock tomorrow.
5 o'clock tomorrow. So the difference between so many hours and the days is going to be, the hours is going to be whatever time it records. 24 hours from that, you get possession. If you do days, it's going to be 5 p.m. However many days.
so
And if it's business days, it's Monday through Friday.
Well, this is all calendar days. Yep, this one's all calendar days.
So this one doesn't matter really, because they can fall on a Saturday or a Sunday.
Yep, this one
Doesn't
could be yep, if it records on Friday, if you had put 48 hours after recording and it recorded at 3 o'clock on Friday, then 3 o'clock on
So-
Sunday, you get possession.
So it will be that the hours are tricky and we better watch it, or better, seems a safer bet to do the calendar day,
Yeah. Yep,
right? So you can ask for 1, 2, or whatever you can
however many
negotiate
days, yep,
with the other party.
correct.
Alright.
You got it. Okay, we good on possession? Okay,
Good
one
stuff.
other thing actually that I just want to talk about on possession is, so what happens though, and this happens a lot. I mean, when I say a lot, maybe that makes it a little frequent, maybe. Is frequent less than a lot? Happens from time to time. So let's say we had put 24 hours and it was recorded 11:56. So it's now Friday at 11:56, I get possession, right? According to
that.
this, I get possession.
Yeah.
So I drive and I show up to the house and the seller's still moving out. Now what?
Yeah, now what?
What do you do?
It's a breach of contract, right? 'Cause you
Okay,
should- you
great.
should-
So they,
You should have been out.
that's right. Which, by the way, this does, let me point this out. Is this does say right here, shall survive closing. Section 3.3 shall survive closing. So you're right, they didn't move out, they're in breach of contract. So what?
So now they either pay you rent or something.
Well, so what are you gonna do? I guess that's really what I wanna know is what are you gonna do? Jessica, you show up, or not you, your buyers show up to the house, the sellers are there still moving out.
They're moving van, I'm ready to call.
Yeah, I got my moving van, I'm ready to move in.
And the other,
I was told like noon today I could get in,
and then you go in there to another moving van. Still.
but yeah, you pull up and there's already a moving van in the driveway. And there's like hardly any furniture in it or whatever,
So they are starting to get out.
so they're starting. What do you do?
All the sellers agent.
Okay, good, so ring ring and I answer, hello.
Come on,
The
Jessica, you
sellers
say,
are
"Hey,
all
I'm here."
Hello.
Hi,
Hey,
your
Your
sellers,
sellers haven't moved out.
haven't moved out yet.
yeah, their dog got sick last night and so they had to take the dog to the vet and, you know, blah, 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 yeah, so. They're working on it,
But your clients are right there.
but your clients are there going, come on, Jessica, we wanna move in.
Um,
I'm your client, I'm here, Jessica. Talk to me.
I don't know. What would I say?
Okay.
Like, they need
So-
to get out,
Yeah,
like, they gotta go.
Here's what your clients expect, your clients are thinking like, hey, call the police.
Yeah, oh,
Okay, so what happens if you call the police though?
They don't have any jurisdiction on private property like that.
Okay, good. What's gonna happen?
They cannot do an
So the
eviction.
police show up,
Nothing.
they show up and the police are gonna get there and they're gonna be like, all right, so what's going on? And so now I'm the police now, Jessica. Hey, what's going on?
hey, so I have this house here that my buyers bought and they're moving day and the sellers haven't left yet.
Okay. Well, let me go talk to them.
Yeah.
Hey, so I got a call, the buyers apparently are supposed to be in the house, yeah, our dog got sick and. You know, we're trying, hopefully we'll be out by tonight. Okay,
Tonight.
so they said they'll be out by tonight. Like, here's the point, the police can't do anything.
Yeah,
They can't like, they're gonna come and show up to keep the peace, to make sure that your buyers don't go get in a fight with them. Like, they'll show up to be like, okay, well, they said they'll be out by, like, can you guys wait?
so wouldn't you just show up to kind of make it better, like take your clients out to lunch or?
Yeah,
do
that's,
something like
so
that?
here's the key thing. What legally can the buyers do about it? There is stuff they could do, but legally, what could a buyer do in that scenario? Well, let's back up from that even. Technically, the seller is now trespassing.
Yes,
Right.
yes,
Yes, because it
I would
used to be
rent.
their house, right? It
Yeah.
used to be.
But the police aren't gonna arrest them,
yeah,
okay? That's not gonna.
Yeah.
So what would happen? So let me ask it this way. Let's forget about this whole scenario. Let's just say I own an investment property and I show up one day. Cause I was doing, let's just say I was doing repairs on it and stuff. But I left on vacation for a week. I come back from my vacation and I go back to go do some work on the house and somebody's moved into my house.
You had squatters.
So they're squatters.
squatters, yeah.
What do I have to do to get rid of them?
In their case, because they are squatters, you need to do an eviction.
That's right. So guess what would happen? Because this is no different than what's happening with the seller. The seller is technically now a squatter. So what do you have to do to get rid of them?
Go for it.
Go through the eviction process,
But it's.
which is gonna take a lot
it's
longer.
different than just letting them go, that's what I'm saying, like you show up and make it better for your
Exactly.
clients, kind of cool the situation.
That's
so
what
they
you want to
can-
try to do.
Yeah.
Is just kind of be like, hey, it's unfortunate, unfortunately it happens. So to some extent, part of what I guess I'm saying to you guys is. As you're going through the contract and you're explaining all this to your client and you get to this section on possession. Tell them, hey, let's try to structure this to where we can try to hopefully get them out of the property a day or two before you're gonna want to move in, just so that in the event they have a flat tire, they get sick, whatever, yeah, the
Yeah,
dog eats their homework, whatever it is that they haven't, we've got a little bit of a buffer built in.
No, the dog chew on the wheels of the moving truck.
Is that, oh yeah, they didn't eat the homework. The dog ate the moving truck, yeah. All right. Next section down here, let's see, where are we at time wise? I'm gonna skip some of these. Actually, no, let me hit on these. No, I'm gonna save it. I'll let Jason talk about
They're funny, Russ.
it. I know, sorry. I'm gonna skip through, I'm just gonna kind of get to the stuff that tends to be problematic for tourists, okay?
Okay.
Well, the rest of the stuff we'll kind of skip over. Okay, next, let's do seller disclosures, because that one's the next one where people tend to mess up. Seller disclosure. So notice here in section 7, it says no later than the seller disclosure deadline referenced in 24A. Seller shall provide to the buyer the following documents in hard copy or electronic format, which are collectively referred to as the seller disclosures. Now, notice though, after that it shows A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L.
Not all of them.
That's all. So what that means is no later than the seller disclosure deadline referenced in 24A, the seller shall provide to the buyer A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L. All of it. What tends to happen though is agents will provide a written seller property condition disclosure for the property. And then they feel like they have met the seller disclosure deadline. But is that true?
No.
No.
Because there's more,
Yeah.
more.
We also have to do, if the property was built prior to 1978 lead-based paint disclosure, we have to give them a commitment for title insurance, a copy of any CC&Rs, the most recent minutes, budget and financial statement for the HOA, copy of any, what?
We have to provide a copy.
Yes.
of CC&Rs.
If you're the seller, you have to provide all of this stuff.
Sometimes that's tough.
Well, that's the point. That's why I'm saying is keep an eye on your seller disclosure deadline. And or when you list a property, start working on getting this stuff right out of the gate. Ask your seller to go to the HOA and get a copy of the CC&Rs. Okay? All of these things have to be provided by your seller disclosure deadline, not just the seller property condition disclosure. Most agents are only going to provide to you the seller property condition disclosure. So don't be one of those agents. Good. All right, next. Trying to think if there's really a whole lot I want to say about.
Maybe you that you are so much in those, whatever you do.
Lawsuits.
Yeah. But what is these sticky things that you have seen around?
Right, yeah, no, that is kind of what I'm trying to make sure to really hit on for you guys, is just, yeah, I think you're good on that. Actually, let's talk about, this part of section 8.1. So 8.1, remember, is the buyer's due diligence condition, okay? This is where they get to do any inspections and things that they want. Well, let's talk about just this section here. So during that time of the buyer due diligence, the buyer's, so B there is buyer's right to cancel or resolve objections. So if the buyer determines in the buyer's sole discretion that the results of the due diligence are unacceptable, they can do one of two things. No later than the due diligence referenced in 24B, cancel the REPC by providing written notice to the seller, whereupon the earnest money deposit shall be released to the buyer. Or they can, number 2 here, no later than the due diligence deadline referenced in 24B, resolve in writing with seller any objections the buyer has arising from the due diligence. So they have two options, either cancel or let's come to an agreement with the seller. C is the failure to cancel or resolve. So this is why I want to bring this up. If the buyer fails to cancel the REPC or fails to resolve in writing with the seller any objection the buyer has arising from the buyer's due diligence, as provided in section 8.1B, which we just talked about, buyer shall be deemed to have waived the due diligence condition and except as provided in 8.2A or 8.3BI, which we'll get to here in a second, the earnest money shall become non-refundable. So if you get past 5 PM on the due diligence deadline, you have failed to cancel or resolve. Okay, so just keep that in mind. All right, next section, appraisal condition. If you check that it is conditioned on that, the buyer has the right to cancel, but this one's a little different than the due diligence. This one is the buyer's right to cancel. If after the completion of an appraisal by a licensed appraiser, buyer receives written notice from the lender or the appraiser that the property has appraised for less than the purchase price, buyer may cancel by providing written notice to the seller. And then make sure you mark this piece with a copy of the notice of appraised value no later than the financing and appraisal deadline referenced in 24C. So if you're going to cancel based on it not appraising, what do you have to provide? So first written notice of the appraised value, but also the cancellation form. So keep in mind, on the due diligence, you could just send over a cancellation and get the earnest money back. This one, if you're canceling on appraisal, it has to give the cancellation plus the notice of appraised value, which is really just, and here's the key, is written notice from the lender or the appraiser. So we have to have something in writing from the appraiser or the lender saying it didn't appraise. So if you ever get a call from your loan officer saying, hey, the property failed to appraise, it only appraised for X amount of dollars, you're gonna go try to negotiate that with the seller first. So, hey, it only appraised for X amount of dollars. But have the lender either give you something in writing from them or the appraiser that you can then forward on if you're gonna cancel. Make sense?
I mean, in the event that you couldn't negotiate,
Yeah, we're gonna first try to negotiate, but if we can't and you're gonna cancel, then you gotta give them the cancellation plus the notice of appraised value. All right. Let's talk about this real quick. If you check the box that there's financing required, so if the buyer's getting a loan, then the buyer has, again, the right to cancel either before the financing and appraisal deadline, or they could cancel after the financing and appraisal deadline. If they cancel before the financing and appraisal deadline, so let's talk about it. If the buyer and the buyer's sole discretion is not satisfied with the terms and conditions of the loan. So let's first make sure everybody understands that. If the buyer in the buyer's sole discretion is not satisfied with the terms and conditions of the loan. So the buyer could just say, I don't like the fact that my interest rate went down. I mean, you would typically think they'd be excited, but the buyer could say, I don't like that it went down.
but they went up.
I don't like that it changed yesterday. I don't like that it went up, whatever. In their sole discretion, if they're not satisfied, the buyer may, after the due diligence deadline referenced in 24B, cancel the REPC by providing written notice to the seller no later than the financing appraisal deadline referenced in 24C, whereupon X amount of dollars of the buyer's earnest money shall be released to the seller without requirement of further written authorization from the buyer, and the remainder of the earnest money shall be released to the buyer without further authorization from the seller. So whatever amount gets written in on this blank line, if the buyer cancels before the financing and appraisal deadline, but after due diligence. So if they're canceling before due diligence, they should just cancel on due diligence. Then you get all the money back.
That could be the full amount.
So here's my thing. If you're representing a buyer, you want to write 0 in there.
Why?
Well, because who do I represent when I'm representing the buyer? The buyer, right?
Buyer.
Who I have to look out for their best interest.
Yes.
Is it in their best interest? You can argue both ways on this, but is it in their best interest to get their earnest money back if they cancel?
Yes.
So that's why I would want to put 0 there if I'm representing a buyer. If I'm representing the seller, though, I don't want it to say 0. Because essentially that turns it into another due diligence timeframe. So for me, if I'm representing the seller, I want to try to put an amount that is equal to the earnest money. Well, they're probably not going to get away with that. So probably I would say, think of it as somewhere in the middle is probably a good number. So let's say it was a $5,000 earnest money. Maybe I want to put $2,500 in there.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't read the next line. Deposit shall be released to the seller.
So now,
Yep.
if you have a good buyer's agent and a good seller's agent, there can be an issue in there, because
Yeah,
one
you're
will
gonna-
got 1 0, the other no.
but
I
see,
want
what
to
I've
have-
found is most agents are not that great. And so I usually put if I'm representing the buyer, I'm gonna put 0 in there and see if I can get away with it.
But then if I'm saying, hey, I don't think that's going to work. I can ask, right? Say, I feel good about half, not 0.
You know, it's-
Try.
So I guess in this case is depends who is dealing with.
That's right. That's the key thing. But just make sure you know, whatever amount gets written in there, if the buyer cancels after due diligence, but before finance and appraisal, that's how much of the earnest money they give up. If they cancel after finance and appraisal,
So Ross, if you are representing the buyer and you put 0,
Thank you.
but when I'm receiving the contract and I see your 0, I can dispute that and say, no.
yeah, you would want to counter me.
Yeah, I said, well,
Yeah.
say, I think that should be at least half.
Yeah.
Or half.
It's great, or try for more even, I don't know, you know. Keep in mind what you're gonna put in on this line here is gonna vary depending on what's going on in the market. Meaning, the last couple years that we've been through, it was pretty normal that people were giving up this earnest money before they even, like before due diligence even, they were just saying, if I cancel, you can have my money.
Why would they do that?
Because that was the only way you could get a house for the last 2
Because it
years.
was so competitive.
Yeah, it was so
right?
competitive, yeah,
So we wanted to see everything. So I'm just thinking back, Ross,
yeah,
to this point, like I said, it depends who is dealing with who.
correct.
Because if there's a more experienced agent like you want 0 for your buyer, and if I'm not experienced enough, I said, okay.
Okay, yeah. And
But
then-
if I'm an experienced agent, I'd say, no, it's not okay.
Right.
I counted offer, I said,
Yeah.
I want my buyer, my
Yeah.
seller to get this much in this event.
Yep. That's what you'd want to do.
Okay, so.
Yep.
Got that part.
Good. Okay, next is section 8.4 is additional earnest money. So you're just saying if we haven't canceled sorry. If the REPC has not been canceled by the buyer provided in 8.1, 2, or 3. Then no later than the due diligence deadline or finance and appraisal, whichever is later, the buyer will or will not deliver additional earnest. If you're gonna deliver additional earnest money, you're gonna put that in there and you would put in whatever that amount is. So the whole point of section 8.4 is to be, hey, we're serious about it and we're not gonna cancel, and here's additional money to prove that we're serious.
How often do you see anything in there?
Not very often.
Not even during the competitive times?
Well, during the competitive time, people just were offering a higher earnest money and saying it's non-refundable to begin with.
Oh,
So
wow.
what you usually, if you're filling up, do you put a 0? Do you leave it?
I usually put 0 there. I check the box for will not and then put 0.
So if it's non-refundable, then like if it doesn't go through, they just don't get that back, right? If something happens.
Yeah, if it's non-refundable, the buyer just
They
loses
just lose
their
that
money.
money.
Yep. All right, I'm gonna skip down now for the sake of time to section 16. So this piece here, really important. Section 16 talks about what happens if. So keep in mind, here's the thing I would say on this is there are a lot of times I get phone calls from people of like, hey, what's gonna happen if blah, 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 blah. My answer is always, well, let's look at the contract and see what it says. Well, you'll notice here, if the buyer defaults. So if the buyer defaults, the seller may elect one of the following remedies. So if the buyer defaults, doesn't get the earnest money in on time, any of those type of things, the seller has 3 choices. They can cancel the REPC and retain the earnest money deposit or deposits if applicable as liquidated damages. So if the buyer defaults, seller can say, great, cancel the contract, give me the earnest money. That's one option. Second option is they can maintain the earnest money deposit or deposits in trust and sue the buyer to try to force the contract to go through,
To force them
to buy the house.
to buy.
The third option they have is to give the earnest money back to the buyer and then pursue any other remedies available at law. So ultimately, think of it this way. If they decide to cancel the REPC and retain the earnest money as a liquidated damages, that's all they get. They're not getting anything else out of that. Like by taking the earnest money, they could not really go back to the seller and try to sue them. I mean, the buyer, sorry. They could not go back and try to sue them. If they keep the earnest money in the trust account, they could try to force them to close. If they feel like their damages are greater than the earnest money and they want to go after it, then they would need to return the earnest money to the buyer and then go after them.
And this,
But the thing is, you give it back, you run the risk, you never see it.
any,
Yeah.
right, if you lose.
Yep. And then C or 16.2. So what happens if the seller defaults? If the seller defaults, buyer may elect one of the following remedies. This one, the buyer could cancel the REPC, and in addition to the return of the earnest money deposit or deposits, buyer may elect to accept from the seller as liquidated damages a sum equal to the earnest money. So a lot of times people will say, I get twice the earnest money. Well, that's not really true. You actually get the earnest money and then an amount equal to it. So that's first option that the buyer has if the seller defaults. Second is that they could keep the earnest money in trust and sue the seller to try to specifically enforce it, try to force them to sell. You probably have a better chance of that than forcing the buyer to buy. Because how are you going to force a buyer to buy if they can't qualify?
Mhm.
But you could force a seller to sell. So, and then C, or the third option is accept a return of the earnest money deposit and pursue other remedies available at law. If the buyer elects to accept liquidated damages, seller agrees to pay upon demand. So the seller's agreeing. If the buyer says, hey, I'll take my earnest money back plus an amount equal to it, the seller's already agreed. We'll pay it to you as soon as you ask for it. Make sense? All right. Next thing to point out is just attorney's fees. The agreement in this contract is, okay, good luck with your mom.
Thanks.
So the agreement in this is the attorney's fees in the event of litigation or a binding arbitration arising out of the transaction. The prevailing party shall be entitled to the costs and reasonable attorney's fees. Now, let me just explain one thing on this. The importance of using our buyer broker agreement and or this contract and getting it signed. So for the buyer and seller is in the event you get sued and you have to go to court and you win, you could get the other party to pay your attorney's fees. So our buyer broker agreement and listing agreement says that same thing. We had recently one of the lawsuits we just settled. The buyer was suing us because they didn't get the house that they wanted, and it really wasn't our fault, but they thought it was that they didn't get it. And our agent didn't get a buyer broker ever signed from them. They did get a limited agency agreement signed, but never got a buyer broker signed. Well, as a result of that, we could not go back. We had nothing saying that they would pay our attorney's fees. So they sued us. We're going to spend probably close to $7,000 in attorney's fees because they hadn't used the buyer broker to have the saying they'll pay our attorney's fees. We can't go after them for the attorney's fees. So it's going to cost our agent more money. No.
So when that happens, Russ, the agent is responsible for covering that amount of money, right?
Yep.
Not the company,
Correct.
or it's not on there, the what is that called, the,
Errors and omissions.
yeah, errors and omissions.
So on this one, that was part of the problem is the way that, and it wouldn't have mattered really on this one anyway, because we ended up settling for such a low amount, but yeah, the way that the attorney wrote the lawsuit, our errors and omissions declined it. Which a smart attorney, if they're going to sue a real estate company, will draft the lawsuit so that errors and omissions will cover it. And this attorney was just dumb and did, so,
Oh, heck. And he's an attorney.
yeah, exactly.
So, but, okay, all of this could have been avoided if the agent had a buyer's broker agreement.
Well, at least that portion of it, we could have said, like, when we settled the lawsuit, we could have said, we'll settle, but you gotta pay our attorney's fees or, something, but. Or if we ended up in court, which we didn't, but
But
There's a lot of lawsuits.
So Ross.
there's really not a lot, but
So Ross,
recently there has.
isn't that reasonable? You've been talking during all this class forever. The buyer broker agreement, the buyer broker agreement. You need to have that, and how I mean, this is just an imprint, has to happen. I'm going to work with you, I need that.
Yeah.
Or we're not working.
Yeah, just get it signed as soon as you can, like. Just know if you're showing properties to somebody without one, you're working for free.
Now, you don't have to say any names, I'm curious, this happened to an experienced or name.
It's an experienced agent.
How
Just-
did it go?
Yeah, basically just thought, oh, I'll get it later.
Maybe they get so comfortable with the client.
Yeah,
they
that's
like,
what it was.
we know each
Yeah, we'll
other.
get it later. Yeah.
Oh,
And then they turn around and sued us, which the funny thing is they sued us. And then after they filed the lawsuit, called the agent, hey, can you show me some more properties?
what?
Yeah.
No,
Okay.
thank you very much.
So this section here, just remember, time is of the essence, any of the days. Well, so let's hit this. Time is of the essence. Basically, it says unless otherwise explicitly stated in the REPC. Performance under any section of each section of the REPC, which references a date, shall absolutely be required by 5 p.m. Mountain Time on this stated date, and the term days and calendar days shall mean calendar days and shall be counted beginning on the day following the event, which triggers the timing requirement such as acceptance. Performance dates and times referenced shall not be binding on title companies, lenders, appraisers, and others. So keep in mind that these dates are not binding on title companies, lenders, appraisers, anybody else.
All these days that we have in there.
Yep. All right. I think that's it. I think we'll stop there. Any questions?
Oh,
Lot of information, huh?
well, it just feels a little bit like,
It is for me.
Yep.
Next. It's not next Thursday, we go fill it out.
Next Thursday will be the how to fill it out. So next Tuesday is, I think it's seller packet is what we'll be doing. Let me make sure.
Is the next time.
So Jason's gonna be teaching the next two classes.
Tuesday and Thursday.
Tuesday, yeah, because I have a different thing I gotta do Tuesday.
Oh,
And then Thursday is Jason doing that.
Jason.
Carlson,
Yeah.
so,
So, Ross,
yeah,
where do we go again when we want to review like today? Because this is what I'm finding out after taking these trainings, that I get so much. But then if I release in the internet, like, okay, I missed that or something.
Hmm.
Makes
So-
more sense.
yeah,
So where do we go to do that?
to get the recording of this, is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
So YouTube,
But was that Century when?
Century 21 Everest Training,
Okay, Century 21.
Yep. and then it'll be under the peak agent, which I think actually you're reminding me Tuesday because of driving and jumping in the car and driving to St. George. I didn't upload Tuesdays, so
So you need to upload.
I need to upload Tuesdays and todays, so anyway. Okay,
So
all right,
Century 21 Everest training.
Century 21 Everest Training, yep. Okay, see you guys, well, I'll probably see you, I'll be here at the start on Tuesday, but then Jason will take over, so.
Well, thank you, Ross.
Tuesday's the next one.
Tuesday's the next one, so, and then tomorrow, actually, if you have not, we're doing the mandatory residential
That's right.
class tomorrow.
So,
Yep.
at 10 o'clock, is it for all the agents?
Yeah, everybody's invited.
Unless you have that one,
Yeah,
Right.
if you've already done it, you don't need to come, but,
because I believe I.
yeah,
But in the mandatory, what do you cover in there again?
that's where we play,
The bingo,
the Jeopardy.
Jeopardy. Okay.
But we do Jeopardy as part of the last day of this class too, the 12 agent UR course, so.
Okay, because tomorrow I need to take some training online,
That's fine,
So
so.
at 10.
10 o'clock. Okay, thanks, see you guys.
Oh, thank